Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today's question comes from Brian. Brian asks, what is on your current reading list? Well, Brian, it's a great question, and it's going to parlay right into our interview for today and today's guest. One I just finished reading, that's Triphasic 2 by Cal Dietz, who happens to be today's guest. Also, Belfry Hockey by Daryl Belfry. And the last one I have not yet read is Tim Harford's How to Make the World Add Up. So hopefully that helps, Brian. And both so far have been fantastic reads. Again, have not read Tim's book. Without further ado, today's guest is the man, the myth, the mad scientist, Cal Dietz. Cal is the head Olympic strength coach at the University of Minnesota and has been the head Olympic strength coach there at the University of Minnesota since 2000. He has developed the strength and conditioning programs and overseen the daily progress in men's ice hockey, men's basketball, women's hockey, men's and women's golf, men's swimming, track and field, baseball, and wrestling. During his tenure, Cal has trained the Hobey Baker Award winner, 2 Big Ten Athletes of the Year, over 400 All-Americans, 28 Big Ten WCHA championship teams, and 7 NCAA national champion teams. 13 team finishes in the top 4 in the nation. He's consulted with the Olympic and world champions in various sports and professional athletes in the NHL, NFL, NBA, and MLB, professional boxing. Also, during his time at the university, he helped found and chair the Sport Biomechanics Interest Group with its purpose to explore the physiological and biomechanical aspects of advanced human performance, encompassing the various aspects of kinesiology, biomechanics, neuromechanics, and physics. Cal is from Shelby, Ohio, and he earned a bachelor's degree in physical education from the University of Findlay in 1996 and his master's degree from Minnesota in kinesiology in May 2000. It's just a really interesting conversation. Cal is a friend and colleague of mine. I call him the mad scientist because he gets me to think outside the box. Having said that, we talk about thinking inside the box and how important that is first. But we chat about the new book, Triphasic 2, the 14 methods. We don't go through all of them, but several of the methods that Cal uses to turn on the system, to train the system, and to transfer the system. It's a fantastic hour and a half. I hope you enjoy the listen. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Cal. Thanks so much for joining us.
Coach, it's good to be here, man. It's finally good to catch up, and we don't get to do this enough, to be honest with you.
The mad scientist, one of the guys, honestly, that probably every listener will know. Obviously, Cal, our podcast is, you're going to have a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, a lot of people in hockey, whether it's management, physical therapy, ATs, etc. But I know your name comes with high clout. I'm honored to have you here, buddy. I consider you a colleague and a dear friend. And I'm super, super excited to share information, not just on training in life, but just specifically too on your new book. I got right in front of me, baby, Triphasic Training 2. So I'm going to start just with a warm up here. Talk to me about that Triphasic series. In the book, you talk about this idea of micro and macro. Triphasic 1 being the micro, Triphasic 2 being the macro. Could you lead us through what that means to the listener?
Well, you know, the crazy thing is people visit me, let's say in the summer, June, or end of June, July, and even most of August. And some people come for a week and visit, and they're like, I didn't see any triphasic stuff going on. Well, we've already done the triphasic earlier in the summer. Like most people are in power and speed, I'm getting people ready for camps. So triphasic, you know, I think the reason Triphasic did so well, it's just concept that you can put into any program, right? It's just a concept, you know what I mean? So it's just a part of your training. You know, do it a couple times a year, maybe 3 at the most, but I do it in season once my athletes have done it all season, right? So it's just a concept into the look and the foundation of what I saw make huge changes. And for people that may not have read Triphasic 1, it's just really a breakdown of human movement. And I focus on a certain training, usually 2 to 3 weeks of eccentrics, the first part of every dynamic movement. And the eccentric is, let's say you're going to jump, when you land and you go down to load the body, like that's the eccentric phase. There's a brief isometric phase. And some people argue there's not. If you look at the muscle, it's actually an isometrically contracted for a brief moment, right? But if you don't have isometric strength and there's no isometric strength, you can't absorb all the force that when you go to land or reverse weight, or a quarterback goes to reverse the ball. So, an NFL quarterback pulls back hard, he's caused a bunch of eccentric forces. And if you need eccentric strength and then isometric strength to stop it. And then you're more powerful to throw the ball forward. So, the isometric part's important, and then the concentric too. And that was really explaining the concept, because I'd heard so much over the years with eccentric and isometric training. They know it's good, but no one had put into systems, especially the Soviet coaches, and I've been fortunate to talk to them like, well, we know isometric's good, but how's it go into the system is the question. And I was just fortunate to experiment and have a coach that was willing to say, hey, let's try this. Like, we know kids might not get, I had two legendary coaches, Phil Lundeen, just into the track Coaches Hall of Fame. And then I had a guy named Dennis Dale on my swim team. And they were like, yeah, let's try some of this stuff because, it's training. They understood the principles of training, right? They're okay. Because even in their training, they won't push kids hard and they may get slower, but they knew there was a rebound effect. And especially not in season, but in the beginning of the semester, right? So you're going I was fortunate as a young strength coach to have these two coaches. And I screwed some things up, especially with the swim team one day, right? And the coach calls me. It's Saturday morning because we swam Friday night, and it's I did some stuff on Thursday or Wednesday that was too much, right? And the coach called me on Friday or Saturday morning. He's like, Cal, yeah, hey, I got a question for you. I'm like, yeah, Dennis Steele. And he goes, yeah, we swam horrendous. He's like, and it's an early meet, it's an early meet. And he goes, oh, I'm like, well, Dennis, it could have been me. I sorry. He's like, you know what? It was a good learning experience. He said, I chewed them out for being softer than baby crap. He's like, it's great. It'll be fine. Just let's not do that again. I'm like, we won't do that again on that day. I said, we'll be fine. Right? So, it was 4 months later or 5, when we went to the Big Tens, we had somewhere around, I think that year we were above 80% lifetime PRs at the meet. So if you get 40% or 30 lifetime PR at a peaking meet, you're going, that's pretty good. We had somewhere around 80% of the guys. So you're going it was all a learning experience for me. So I was fortunate now. And then, Triphasic 1, people put their athletes through, but Triphasic 2 gets into the deeper into the program, right? And more details, especially for peaking and just the concept of training the athlete. You know what I mean? We can talk about performance pattern cycling, how we'll talk more later on it, but just this right sequencing of exercises. So, I tell people when I figure that out, really what it is switching from antagonist to antagonist back and forth, right? So you do a squat, and then you do a reverse hyper to offset the squat pattern. So I tell people, if you don't think a lift can screw up patterns, let's say you're going to do 10 sets of 2 of an Olympic lift or 10 sets of 2 of squats, and I love both those lifts. Yep. Why don't you have your athlete do that on 1 minute intervals, whatever you want, 10 sets, and then have them run full sprint? Watch how bad the sprint is compared. You know what I mean? But what I found was that if I took the squat and paired it with a reverse hyper and shifted them back and forth, so I offset the quad dominant pattern with a hamstring glute pattern, and then I had the athlete run, I didn't see the compensations. So it's just more athletic is what it is. Now, you might say, hey, well, will they get as strong in the squat? Well, you might lose a little bit of strength in the squat if that's your main objective. But my main objective has never been strength in the squat. It's been to make better athletes, as you do, right?
Absolutely.
Does that make sense? So Triphasic 2 has 14 different new principles, and some are about 10 years old. I haven't released, but the others, I was very fortunate coaching COVID. COVID was good, especially to Chris Corfus and I, because we would get on the phone and we're reading stuff and talking, and nobody could come over and train. And I was locked out of my gym until July that year. You know what I mean? Basically to train athletes. So, I was able to catch up to ultimately gain a bunch of stuff, get caught up and then start creating ideas. I probably drank a little bit too much tequila, but tequila makes me a little bit more, it seems like it's years ago, somebody told me that it was kind of not hallucinogenic. Yeah, maybe, but like it's more of a stimulant versus a sedative, right? Like regular alcohol. So tequila is really actually, and I ran tests on that. So when somebody told me that about a decade, 12 years ago, so what I did was I would like drink some really good bourbon and ran omega wave tests after, 5-10 minutes after each. And like after one or two bourbons, like my DC potential in my brain went down. But then tequila, I could hold like 4 or 5 drinks. Now I was still drunk, but the DC potential in my brain was still good. So like, tequila is really a good one. And I even tried the cheap stuff, the really bad stuff. It still is the same thing, right? Yeah. So I was drinking tequila in COVID. Things were pretty good. I was learning. I mean, there was days, Anthony, where I just didn't even realize. I mean, I'm 7 hours deep in reading, and I was like, I didn't even know if I ate lunch that day because I was just so caught up in reading and learning, you know what I mean, more at that time.
It brings me to an interesting pivot. Like, you talk about this in your book, the start of Triphasic to becoming a free thinker and talking about beyond conformity. And I always value this about you, Cal, and I mean this, like you run your own experiments with your own athletes, whether it's on you or whether it's your athletes. I call that applied experimentation as opposed to journal articles. There's nothing wrong with either one, right? There's pros and cons. I think about that a lot. And I also come back to a quote, and it's kind of, I'm paraphrasing from a Mike Boyle-esque, first understand the box, then learn to think outside of it. Again, I'm paraphrasing.
And that's so right. It's so right, though, right? You have to first understand.
That's right. That's right. And but I guess my question is, like, when I think about the box, and this is where I'm curious as to where you go with this. Okay, when I think about the box, for a strength and conditioning and a performance coach, there's 2 main principles that I think have to be inside the box. General adaptation syndrome, an understanding of that. These are just mine. Specific adaptations of imposed demands. So those are 2. Those are inside the box. And then I think what I would consider what Dan Paff would call first principles, which spawn from there. This is what I think: psychology, physiology, physics, programming, and biomechanics. To me, you have to be a serial specialist in those. And that takes years and years and years and years of experience before you start thinking outside the box. So I'm reading your Triphasic too, and I'm thinking at times when I look at these, wow, this is some interesting stuff. This is some interesting way of thinking at things. And I guess I want the listener to know that took years and this is not an Instagram post for 30 seconds, right? Like you understood the principles inside the box first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, like the continuing education of myself, right? The amount of money I've spent on my own education, calling up experts and saying, hey, can I talk to you for an hour? And I'll be like, I want to pay you for your time. You know what I mean? And it might be $250, it might be $500, but they could give me insight. Things I just, and I mean, and we're talking like, I mean, I've done physicists before.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're talking about like the field of quantum biology. Like I ran across, I don't know if it was called that then, but about 8-9 years ago, I ran across stuff like this and electrons and stuff within the cell to speed up cellular metabolism. Like, all right, I have to kind of figure this out. And you're going, well, what do I read? And maybe you read like the Body Electric and stuff like that to realize. I was like, oh boy, this is a lot. I just need somebody to help me. And once I got somebody to summarize it for me and say, okay, this is what's going on, I'm like, okay. Then when I went and read those books again, I'm like, okay, this makes more sense. So, but to your point, so many people come in here and they want to be like, I want to be like you, Cal. And I'm like, okay, well, here's the list of, I read the Soviet Sports Review. That's 30 years of publication. And I'm like, if I have it, start reading it. Well, that's a lot to read. Well, yeah, no kidding, right? I'm not kidding you. I read Zatorsky's Principles.
I think it's Principles of Strength Training, right? Right behind me.
Yeah, the original Green Book, and then it was modified with him and I can't remember. With
Kramer? Was it Kramer too?
Yeah, I think it was Kramer. Yeah, excellent books, right? But the point is, I read it 6 times, and now there was no internet back then.
Yep.
But I realized at that point, I read it 6 times. Like I read it first and I put it down for a year, and I didn't have any money to buy any more books. So I read it again, and I realized I got more information now because I have experience, right? So this all goes to what you're saying here. You have to figure out the foundation before you can create stuff, right? And then even with Mel Siff, right? I mean, I read Super Training twice, and then I flew out to see him. Right. And spent 5 days in his home, or 4 days, and 5 days, 4 nights, whatever it was. But like to be able to sit there and talk with him, and he kind of inspired that email or my opening statement about free thinking that I put in the book, right? Like, here's the thing, like with the box, Mike said, like, what do you say? You have to,
You said learn to think inside the box or master the box before you think outside it, right?
Yeah, right.
I'm paraphrasing, by the way. That's not a direct quote. It's a paraphrase.
No, yeah, yep. Of course. And Mike's right. And my thing was, I want to know that the box is correct. Right? So even though there's a world expert, so let's say you take an exercise and I'm going, okay, did anybody ever test this exercise? And then I have somebody do it. And then I either test them on the balance plate right after it. Yep. To see if the brain liked that exercise. And if the brain doesn't like that exercise, their sway gets worse. Or I muscle test them, which I became an expert in the last 10 years. I would say somewhat of an expert. I've probably only done 500,000 muscle tests on people, right? So, because like in my gym on a daily basis, I'll watch somebody run. And if there's a running flaw, I muscle test them to see what's wrong in the body. Because the brain's hardwired to run correctly. So my thinking is, if there's a running flaw and I tell them to fix it, I only covered up the problem in the body, the reason it's compensating for that, right? So if they have an arm out when they're running, a right arm, and I tell them to hold the right arm in, I just covered up the reason for the right arm. And 90% of the time, the reason for the right arm is there's a lateral sling that's off. So the sling that runs from the arm to the lat to the contralateral QL, down the glute med, down the inside of the hamstring to the arch of the foot, a lot of times they have a foot problem. Yep. So I don't coach the arm to be in because the arm is held out. The body balances itself on that one leg. So then what do I need to do? I need to train the right foot or get it in right. Now, if they've come out of a boot, they have a foot problem, right? We've all seen this. So if they run and their arms out. So I strengthen the foot, and then I have chiropractors that I can send them to adjust foot bones, because sometimes it's the foot bone that's out of place because they've been in a boot or a hockey skate the whole season, like a talus, right? So then there's so much. But the point is I go back to like, make sure the box is correct, because I'll test everything. You know what? I find out that I'm wrong, or what people might think. And I shouldn't say wrong, because we get results. It's just less than optimal. So then the question becomes, is there a better way? And that's what I kind of keep trying to look for, is the better way. You know who's proven me wrong the most in my lifetime? Myself. Because I question everything I've ever put in those books. I've questioned and try to keep making better. Now, it's not the end. Whatever I'm doing is not the end all be all in there, because we might keep making it better. And that's what I hope. You know what I mean? And what I'm doing sometimes, like, when you read Triphasic 2, people would come to my gym and say, oh, I didn't see any Triphasic, but I saw all this other crazy ass stuff, right? And I'm like, yeah, well, this is what I've been doing some, like, supramaximal loading, Anthony. Like, I was told you can't do that with athletes. I started 11 years ago, and last summer I had a female do 600 pound on the Mars bar. Have you ever seen the Mars bar?
I have not.
They're a safety bar, basically. They feel really good, so you can hold a lot of weight with them. Hand supported, single leg, 600 pound female on it. Like, I had men doing 800, and we just stopped them there, right? But is it the point to do 800 for isometrics or eccentrics? No, but it's because they could.
Sure.
Right. And we were super safe. If they missed, the bar moved like 1 inch if they dropped it. Right. So it wasn't a big deal. And the profound results, like, I mean, I had one kid, he was already a first round draft pick. He was about 6'4". He was drafted the year before, busy, didn't get to train much with me. This year, he trained a lot with me, goes to his team. And when they tested him, he was 0.9 meters per second faster.
Jeez.
In his 20. And they're like, we've never seen this. What happened? I'm like, well, he did a series. He's 6'4", long, lanky, needed to get more strength. So the super maximal loading in 4 weeks got him strong, huge hormone response, bone density, right? So, and it transferred in the next 2 to 4 weeks, where before he went to camp, we got him ready. And for a first round draft pick already, to increase the next summer by 0.9 meters per second at the end of his 20. Right. That's pretty good.
Cal, off the cuff question. I think this is interesting to me because I look at it myself and say, Anthony, you got a lot to learn here. But when you do a new method, when you come up with a new idea, when you say, Anthony, test it, do you test that intra-session? Do you wait till the block's over? Sometimes, Cal, I'll be honest with you, I'm a very big, not pessimist, but like sometimes I'll say, well, geez, I mean, you test it after the block. There's so much confounding that can go on. There's a million different things for that. Do you like to test intra-session for that, or do you wait and do you like to test after the fact? I'm just curious.
Well, now with my programs, if you saw the programs, I have downloadable thing for the book where you can look at all the programs, right?
Yep.
And people look at them. Like I'll have 3 blocks. Some blocks have 12 things. Some blocks have 8 exercise, right?
Sure.
You roll through those. So my programs are too dynamic to figure out if something actually works anymore,
Sure.
right? Like one details thing. So I have to test intra-session. But I do have friends who run simple programs.
Yep.
What I'll do is I'll toss it to them.
Okay.
Right. And years ago, if you look at old Triphasic, like 20 years ago programs, that's what I put in there. You're going, those were simple programs that I could replace one exercise.
Yep.
Right. And say, okay, these people got better results, or split a group of 10 kids into 5 do this exercise. Everything's the same but now I can't. The program's too dynamic, right? Like there's too much stuff going on. But let me give you an example of intercession. So do you remember the exercise, the Uri, where the bands are across the waist, they're in the rack and they're driving with one leg and they're driving forward. We call it the Uri, or the horizontal hip with bands, right?
Yep.
When I made that exercise up for the listen, I think the listeners could probably look up Cal Dietz, the Uri, horizontal hip, and you'll come up with something. You know what I mean? And it's in the rack. And Anthony, so I came up with that exercise and it felt good to me. So what I did that day, I'll pull the work. I'll say, okay, you're going to do this first. So the athlete got a little warmed up, reps on max sprint at 20 yards or 30. And then goes and does 2 sets of that Uri in the rack. And they come back and they go run for us. And they ran 0.5 meters per second faster. I had one coach call me and says they got 1 mile an hour faster with their young high school kids. So, and the athlete didn't even know how much faster they ran. They could feel it. They looked back, dropped a cord on my 1080 that was measuring them, and laughed at me. They're like, "What'd you just do to me?" And that's an example of an intra-set.
Sure. And would you call that result a post-activation potential,
yes,
pattern specific?
Yes.
So you would use something like that to excite what you would do after that. If you're going to sprint that day, or is that how you
can do that? Yes, 100%. You're dead right. So let's say, because I know a high school coach who actually, when you see mine, it's set up in a rack, right? So hand positions, certain, yeah. But like I got a coach that called me, he says, "Cal, before we sprint, my athletes will go up to a fence, hold on to it. We got 2 bands and they're double banding it. And then people are holding the band, and they do it before they go sprint because the kids say they feel faster. Well, if they feel faster, we're going to run with it. So yes, they do it that way. What I do is I basically, like, my best series, I think, for posterior chain would be a reverse hyper, do the Uri in the rack. And then I follow that, Anthony, with a prime time, the straight legged run.
Yep. I saw that in the book. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now I may put exercises in between there, obviously some quad stuff to offset the posterior pattern, but that's the sequence, right? It might be a quad exercise, a reverse hyper, a quad, a Uri in the rack, another quad, and then the prime time. And like when you see the athletes, and if somebody wants to look up prime time on my video thing, prime time with Olympian, there's a video of one of my 185-pound, 3-time Olympian, 6-time world champions. When she does that, she's 5'11", maybe 6 foot. She won't tell me, like, it doesn't matter, right? But I don't know. A lot of women don't want to be 6 foot, maybe. So whatever. Yep. She'll say 5'12", whatever. So you know what I mean? But when you see her, it's pretty magical. Like, I'm talking, if you watch her back foot when she pushes off, it's almost 90-degree angle. Like, it's and she has a huge split. And Anthony, that's at the end of summer. I never coached her. There's 2 coaching points in the prime time that I used. It was push out the back and have a slight forward lean. Those are the only 2 that I use. Because, again, if she had an arm out, we know what the problem was. And she did at the beginning of summer. But I use spring ankle exercises. All the ankle stuff that we do fixes that. Arm being out, on that video alone, I'm pretty sure I could lecture for an hour and a half on the details, right? And that's eventually will come in the triphasic system if I release it in the next 5 years, like the details that's involved. So the point to you is that like on that exercise alone, the key is for all this is I'm trying to get the right patterns. And when she does it, she's traveling as fast as some of my NHL guys when they do that. If we hook the 1080 device up to her, measure her speed, and it looks like, and there's NHL guys that pound the ground that are violent, right? Where she's fluid and dynamic. So I tell them it's a super powerful dancer when she does it. And she is so neurologically gifted. Like there's some exercises that when I made them up, I would watch people and everyone's doing them a little like different than what she would do. When she walked in there and she did it. And like one example was she was doing a leg exercise and she grabbed with the opposite arm. Everyone was grabbing with the same side arm. And when she did it, just naturally grabbed with her opposite arm. I'm like, that's the correct thing. So then I tested everybody. So I'm like, all right, I want you to do a set with this arm. Then I want you to do a set with this arm. And when they grabbed with the opposite arm, the leg was able to get more reps than if they grabbed with the same side. So I knew she was dead right. And I know why. That kind of just stabilizes the entire sling, all the slings that run through the body. That's why when you're running and pushing off with your left leg, the right arm's back because it helps stabilize from the foot all the way right. But she does everything. Like she's one of my best neurologically ever, Anthony. And I'm just going, I've learned more from him or her, Lee Steckline, right? I'm sitting here going, whatever she does, that's how we're going to do all the exercises because it's so like literally sometimes like when you get deep into my system, I actually know where the eye position needs to be for each exercise. So what I'll do is I stand in front of her, wherever she puts her head and her eyes, that's where they need to be. I've never coached her on this. And then I check it with other people and she's 100% right. She's never steered me wrong. Again, Anthony, get back to what Mike talks about. You have to fully understand the box before you can even start to look at her to go, oh, I would have to understand the box to literally find her in my weight room. And she's standing here for a decade now.
100% in that box.
Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah.
Well, people ask me, you still get excited? I'm like, that shit gets me excited. Learning and keeping digging, right? Anthony, like it's never ending.
Nope.
You know what I mean?
I do agree with you. And, you bring up a good point there about learning from some of your gifted athletes as well. Yeah, there's outliers there. Yeah, I get it. There's some that are touched by the hand of God, but it's amazing sometimes what they don't teach you in a textbook just by looking at how your elite athletes move as well, right?
Right, 100%.
I want to pivot slightly. I want to get into some of the chapters. We have this first chapter after we talk about beyond conformity, which again, I really love. We talk about turning on, okay? And I know because I was at one of your courses in Columbus, Ohio, probably 5 years ago at least. Talk about the RPR system, okay? Talk about, to the casual listener that might not know it, what is it and why is it important and how do you use it?
So RPR is really a self-care system, right, of reflexes. And these reflexes, like we didn't find them all. Some we came across were really initially started with Be Activated in Douglas Heel. And I went to one of his courses and so a quick story about how it came to me. A coach, I have a lot of coaches visit. He came in and I had an assistant at the time that had some serious injuries in high school, probably ended his career, but he was a great coach and still having issues. And this guy literally changed everything in a matter of a half hour. And I went, what is this? Like, okay. I said, where'd you learn this? He said, I learned from a guy from South Africa. I told my assistant, I'm like, find this guy. I will fly there. I'm going to pay him to teach me this. You know what I mean? So I was like, okay. And then, I found out that he was coming to Chicago in 6 weeks, so I didn't have to go to South Africa, right? So, and that's where I actually met Chris Korsquist because I found out who was hosting it. I called Chris. Hey, Chris, my name's Cal Dietz. He's like, and I'm like, hey, can I can I come to the course? I said, I'm not sure if I can come. I'm going to pay for spots and my assistant will come, but I'm paying for spots because I'm in season, Anthony. So I wasn't sure if I could get away. Yep. And then he goes, is this Cal Dietz that wrote Triphasic Training? I said, well, you actually read the book? I'm like, yeah, that's me, right? Whatever. And Chris and I have hit it off ever since, obviously. You know what I mean? So, yeah. And then we met Douglas, and then Chris and I started our PR. You know, Douglas is involved, obviously. Yep. And the magic is it basically, like, Douglas found the Chapman reflexes. And that's what these reflexes are. Like, we have people rub a point and it activates certain things like the glutes. And you're going, if you want to look it up, these Chapman reflexes have been around over 100 years. They're nothing new. But what Douglas did was help put it into a system. Does that make sense?
It does.
Through a series of things. And then Chris and I have evolved it in the sense of teaching it to coaches. Because when you go to Douglas' course, it's a lot of hands-on. Well, that doesn't work for you with 30 people in your gym a day, right? So then it's about a 3-minute, the basic level 1 you learn is like a 3-minute warm-up. And I talk about it in the book, Anthony, like when kids come to my gym, I'm like, you got a 15-minute dynamic warm-up or a 3-minute RPR, and we can get going, right? What do they choose? They choose the 3-minute RPR.
3 minutes every time. Yep.
3 minutes. You can do it with your hands. You can do it with massage. The massage gun works well too. And some people, if they're pretty much generally good to go, healthy, that massage gun turns the things on, right? So, and then Anthony at 6:30 in the morning, I'll have him do RPR. Then we go over, do one goat drill, and they're running. If they're in my speed loading model, which would be 25 to 50% in the gym, like under that load, the high speed stuff. So you're jumping with light loads instead of squatting or with heavier loads, right? They're getting pulled on Monday morning at 103% on the 1080. And I haven't pulled any hamstrings. And I'm at 40,000 workouts at this point with no warm-ups.
And you know what, Cal, honestly, the older I've gotten with it, not that I'm not poo-pooing this dynamic warm-up, but there's a monotony to doing the and if you can get that by priming, I call it pulling the fire alarm without burning the house down, right? You're priming the nervous system. You're priming movement. If you can get that in 3 to 5 minutes, that's a massive bonus, right?
Well, then we can train more.
Absolutely.
Right. So my point, and understand, Anthony, we don't start that day one, right? So we go through about a month where I know they're trained pretty well, and we start reducing the dynamic warm-up. But after a month, the kids are like, can we just start the RPR stuff? Yep, let's just do the RPR. We do it every day, but the point is like, we wait till they're trained. And I know the patterns are starting to become more correct. Because look, if you have a bad pattern and you run, you might pull a hammy if you're not warmed up. You know what I mean? But again, it goes back to the animal thing. Like, the gazelle doesn't stretch before the lion chases them, the whole thing in the morning, whatever. Yep. But, ultimately, you're right. Once the athlete's kind of trained, Anthony, and it's just a fail safe. And I've been fortunate. I mean, Anthony, I had 1 year, the national title we lost to Brajesh actually that year, but we didn't have one soft tissue miss first time ever that whole season. We only had 2 people miss practices, not one practice miss, with 2 broken bones, a high ankle sprain and a wrist. And that was it. You know what I mean? So we're going, okay, we're doing the right thing. We're always pretty low on soft tissue. But ultimately, like, it's just a margin for error. Cause here's the deal. When I see an athlete move, if they're not moving correctly, I can spot it now. Even one of my guys skating on the ice, like if he takes a puck in the foot or the quad, I will see that hip pattern change. We might talk about it, but
talk about that, Cal. Talk about that for me, because you talked about the book, QL, glutes, and hamstring. Is that the one? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So when a person hip extension should initiate, and if it's the most powerful, it should fire the glute first, then the same side hamstring, and then the opposite side QL should fire in that sequence, because the QL has to fire then so the body doesn't rotate itself, right? And the hamstring fires after the glute. So, but the catch is when I see people skating now, or I see people running or just walking's a given. right? So if I see somebody kind of overstriding and they got a forward lean, Anthony, I know they're not using their butt to push themselves forward first. The hamstring is doing the initial firing. Okay. And now people ask, well, like PTs have said, hey, Cal, well, there's research showing that the hamstring actually is already on when people are running before the glute like has its big time firing pattern. I'm like, yes, of course. If the hamstring wasn't on and you're running, you're going to blow your knee when the foot strikes the ground, right? So, but there's some level. But what happens is when the glute fires massively to generate the force, then the hamstring will follow, then the contralateral QL. So, and I see this all the time in athletes or people that come to me with problems. I go, okay, people send me video before they visit me. A lot, mainly it's just athletes that are out of college in the pro level. And I'm like, I know what your problem is. I know why you have a hamstring problem because I see the hamstring when they're running I'm like, I can fix it from here, but they want to come in anyway. I'm like, all right, pay my fee, come in. Yeah. Right. So they come in, like, and I spend the day with them. And there's no kidding. There's a few that I've fixed in less than 2 minutes. So then I got to spend the rest of the day with them. Whatever.
With RPR, right? With RPR.
Yeah, RPR. Yep. Yeah, but also it's like there's some other problems there. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's like a foot problem and it's an old injury. So here's the thing with RPR in the patterning. Like when I started learning it, like, you know, the one story I tell is that I had track athletes that were quad dominant. And what we did was we were able to get that quad dominant pattern out of the athlete and their quads got smaller. But what magically happened was they started running faster because there's no compensation, because the quad got bigger because there was a compensation pattern. And what happens, Anthony, is, you know, I remember I'd be squatting, you know, when I oversaw 12 teams at the University of Minnesota, I'm squatting 700 people or 300 people. I got 600 knees and I got 5 people with knee pain, and I'm getting blamed because they got knee pain in one leg and like, oh, it must be the squats. I'm like, I got 600 knees squatting. I got 5 knees and 5 athletes that are bothering. Like, how is it the knees, right? Like, but what I realized then is RPR can help me fix those patterns, because look, they're blaming me or young strength coaches for that knee pain. It's how that athlete compensates. It's not their fault. It's not the young strength coach's fault. But you know how many young strength coaches, you know, you and I might not get heat from a trainer or somebody, but the young strength coach, they're just instantly going to blame them for bad technique, right? But my thing is like RPR can help fix that pattern so no knee pain shows up. And they don't get blamed for what the athlete has brought to them. It's the athlete. I can't tell you how many times where people think it's, oh, my technique's bad. No, it's how you compensate, right? And then here's the funny thing. I'm fortunate enough to see my athletes and I see how they compensate and the compensation patterns they have. Guess who also has the same one as the kid? The father or the mother. Yeah. It's genetic, right? It's genetic. And people say, well, what do you mean your elite athletes have compensation patterns? They're elite. I'm like, elite athletes are the best cheaters.
That's right.
They can cheat. So if they get hit in a quad, right, the body is going to rewire itself very fast so that something's going to do the quad. So that could be the abductor magnus will get more involved, right? It'll jump in there, like all kinds of things adjust. So, you know, that's the crazy thing is that, and when I talked about the female, the 6-time world champ doing the prime time, when you watch her, that's what I'm talking about. The patterns are correct. Yep. If she's injured that morning in hockey doing a skill session or some puck hits her, I will know there's something. She will not move that fluid. Sure. So those are the things I look for with exercise, right? And like just watching athletes move is and the reason they do move, you know. So Anthony, like let's take the quad, or let's take the glute, the QL, and the hamstring thing and apply it to an exercise for your listeners. So I think what do you think? Would people know a reverse hyper or RDL better? What do you think? Probably RDL.
RDL, yeah. Probably
yeah.
RDL, yep.
So what will happen is if, let's say the athlete has when their hip goes to move and they're walking, the hamstring will fire before the quad or the glute. I'm sorry. If you see that pattern in an RDL, what happens instead of the hip the hips and the back moving together, that the leg will have a tendency to straighten first.
Yep.
So their legs go to move. Does that make sense? Before their hip actually initiates. Yep. So if the glute fires first, they're fine. If the hamstring fire first in an RDL, then the leg straightens. And then if it's the QL pattern in that person, then the upper back moves first and initiates, and then they bring the RDL through. In the reverse hyper, same thing. What will happen is the hamstring, if it fires first, the leg straightens. Okay? Or actually, if the leg's straight, they'll bend. They'll bend their knee to do the reverse hyper. And then the other one is that when they go to initiate the reverse hyper, a single leg, their upper back tightens and their shoulder lifts up. So that's just a sign that you can see that stuff in your athletes. And then I have them address the RPR. But one of the magic things I wrote about the toe glute reflex, I believe I put it in the book, right?
Big toe?
Yeah.
Big toe?
Yeah, big toe.
Oh, yeah.
If they squeeze with the toe glute reflex, if you squeeze that big toe to initiate hip extension, which is what should happen when you walk, okay, then the glute fires first. So what I've seen over the years is that, Anthony, if I can just so here's the magic, right? Let's say I don't even do RPR, whatever. Athlete comes in here and we do all the exercises correctly. And the patterns are correct in the weight room. We've done 100, 150 patterns, repetitions, 200 maybe even. But they're not walking correctly, or they're not using their big toe to push themselves forward when they do 10,000 reps of the bad repetition. They've erased everything. So the big one I do teach, and I've done this multiple ways, have an athlete come in, bad pattern. All right, I need to teach you to walk. You're going to walk, squeeze that big toe for the next 2 days. I don't even coach them on using their glutes. Guess what happened? I pull the insert out of their shoe. The big toe wasn't being used. After 2 days, there's a huge, like the cushion of the insert in their shoe, or not the insert, but just the sole of the shoe. There's a huge toe mark, and their glutes are turned on. So they can literally turn their glutes on if they use them when they walk. But what shuts off the shoe? What shuts off the big toe when we walk? Like flip-flops.
Oh, worst. Yeah, big time. Big. It also,
yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it shortens everything. The fascia underneath, plantar fascia. One of the worst things I tell our hockey players wearing sandals. One of the worst things. You know. Let me ask you this, Cal. When you see that, like for your RPR, are there go-tos? Like for example, glutes for sure, diaphragm, psoas. Are those part and parcel? Like are those? What would you say the 4 main Mount Rushmore parts are that you constantly address with your athletes anatomically, RPR wise? I know it depends on the compensation, but what would you say that from your experience, the big boys would be?
Yeah, Anthony, like every day we do the 13 basic level ones, right? But if you're going to worry about that, if something's not working, definitely have them readdress the psoas and the glutes, because those two things, right? If you make sure you readdress those, and here's my thing, like people want to talk about the core and the core being strong, like 100%, but I've never seen somebody have a weak core that has a strong set of hips. It's not possible. Well, because the core sets on the hips.
That's right.
Right? So then on the reverse of that, if they have a weak hips, I've never seen somebody have a functionally strong core. So what people do if they have weak hips, they might do a ton of bridges isometrically and they can lock it down. But Anthony, when I test them dynamically with strength in the core, they got nothing. Yeah. They can hold a position isometrically because they can train the core to be stiff. But if the hips aren't strong, Anthony, they can never dynamically be strong in the core. It's not possible. Got it. Tell me, like, every athlete you've seen with a big set of glutes, Anthony, their core's strong.
Oh, yeah.
Right? There's just no getting. So then years ago, I connected, before I even learned all this with RPR, I tested some foot strength at some elite athletes. I'm talking, I had one that was a 44-inch vertical, Anthony, 270 pounds. Yeah, I mean, they're standing there. It looked like he was shot up. Yeah, he was standing there. It looked like he shot out of a canoe, ran a 4.4. Didn't really run much. He was a world-class thrower. Okay, so he was, clean and jerk, or I don't know if he jerked to 440, but he cleaned 440, right? Like those, I had 3 of those people over the years, cleaned to 440, 200 kilos for other people. But you're sitting here going, and when I tested the toe strength in that person, Anthony, it almost, so I put my thumb against it. I said, all right, push. And Anthony, they almost dislocated my thumb. That's how hard. And this dude had a monster glutes. And then I started testing people with monster glutes. I tested toe strength. Guess what? Big toe strength correlated with monster glutes.
It's interesting, Cal, but I don't know where it was when I learned this from you about the big toe glute reef. Like, I can tell you, we started using that cue 5 years ago. It's just a game. And by the way, this is the other secret part of that cue. I don't care if it's an upper body exercise either.
Yes.
Like, because it's a full body exercise. You use that on the bench press. You use that, on a single arm dumbbell bench press. You use that 100%. In a squat. Every exercise that you squeeze, that you include the glutes, it's that potentiation effect. You get more radiation, whatever Pavel Tsutsouline would call it. But that's it.
Yeah. Well, the magic is like, powerlifting, purist powerlifter might criticize us because if we squeeze the toe, the glutes fire in the bench press, and their glutes may come off the bench a little bit, but the bar speed's faster. And look, I know in competition you have to keep your butt on, but I'm not in none of my athletes have ever done competition, right?
Not what we're here. That's right.
Not what we're here for. And I love powerlifting. I'm not criticizing it. But don't criticize me because you don't understand what I'm trying to do here. 100%. Right? That bar speed needs to move faster. And if their butt comes off the ground, and then I tell them, like, hey, if I go to push somebody in sport, my glute has to fire to stabilize me pushing them. Yep. Because if it doesn't, I'm gonna push them and I'm gonna fall back.
Exactly. Absolutely.
So the reason it works in upper body exercises is because it stabilizes the spine when the glutes fire. So if the glutes are working, the spine has more stability, and then the upper body can generate more power. That's just how it works, right? Read the spinal engine.
It's beautiful. Okay, slight transition, but we're still in a warm-up. Okay, I'm the only guy, apparently, I didn't get the memo. The GOAT drill. So you got to, I'm going to rewind not so distant, okay? Because I know I looked at your YouTube page getting prepped for our interview, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Cal's been doing this for years. Shame on me. Anyways, so
but I'm going to rewind. Too much. No, I haven't shared it.
I'm going to rewind. So the Miller boys, they're training with you now. Obviously, Steve Miller, assistant coach, right? So both the boys come down this past summer for a couple of workouts. They're like, Coach, have you done the GOAT drill? I'm like, GOAT drill? And they're like, oh, Cal does the GOAT drill. And I start laughing. I said, the mad scientist. I got to look into this. And then I read it on Triphasic, and so talk. Here's what I'd like you to do. First of all, what is it to the listener that doesn't know? And then you talk about this. Talk about the physiology behind it, the eyes, the gaze, what it does. You talk about as the foot being the hub of the spoke and how important the foot is. Talk about the GOAT drill. What is it? Why is it important?
Well, it was really quick. It was originally, I got it from Dr. Sandek, who Dan Fichter actually pointed me to this drill. And it's basically a figure eight. And this PhD, I think she's a psychologist. And she had clinics where she would, she realized that the right and left side of the brain wasn't fully connected in kids with behavioral problems, whether it's ADD or just social behavioral problems. And the profound results they got from just these kids looking at an object and doing a figure eight pattern. And she called it the infinity walks. So that's just her walking around. It's in the book, right? That's just them walking, doing the drill. And 7 years ago, I played around with it and I liked it. And then I was like, well, let's just try to make it better or put it on steroids. You know what I mean? No pun intended there.
No, Cal, you wouldn't do that.
No. Anyway, but the point is like, so I realized that this actually works because I just ran some simple balance tests with it. And I'm going, oh, I see why. Because, a functional neurologist that I dealt with, and they would say, hey, if the right and left brain hemisphericity is off, then we got problems and the balance is bad. I'm like, yeah, okay, I can see it right here. And then I'm going, okay. So then in COVID, I really just got creative with it. And so basically you're running a figure eight, you're looking at an object the whole time so that you're looking to the left and then you're looking to the right after you run the figure eight, and you never lose sight of that one object. And when you do that, then what I did was I added some complexity to the drill. And I had a tennis ball in their hand and they're moving their hands around, right? So the tennis ball, so they're running this drill. And people say, well, I don't have those big circles. On game day, my athletes do it around 2 hats on the floor. We're visiting another. So it's a simple, it's not the point, right? Now, if you look up Olympian goat drill, you can see the most advanced one I've ever seen. I had a 19-year-old Olympian. He signed a contract for $70 million as a 21-year-old. You know what I mean? So he's a real athlete. I got another one behind him following him. But the point is when they're doing that drill, it's crazy. But the magic behind the drill, when you're doing it, is that you're kind of pushing the speed. And then so the 2 main things I think you need to do is have a small ball in your hands. Now, if you're playing football, like I get that sent to me, NFL teams, I know there's a group of linemen out there, they're doing a ball around the football, and some receivers are too. I get videos sent to me about it. But then the other thing you're doing math. So you're doing brain stuff, hand around the waist, and let's say you're just doing a simple figure 8 in the most simplest form ever. So Anthony, and then the brain is doing so much at that time. Your vision's involved, your kinesthetic awareness. And with that being said, and then the math you're doing, I essentially because I tried to count by 2s, but everybody's so good at it. So we just started at 100. And let's say you're doing, and people say, how many reps? I do 1 rep on game day. We started at 100. We put 2 hats down. They do a figure 8 with a tennis ball. They count from 101 or 100. They'll subtract by 3. Because subtracting by 3 is harder than do. So, and people are like, well, and they mess up. I don't care if they mess up. And they're saying it out loud. Yep. And you do 1 rep, you go from 101. Once you get to 0, Anthony, you're done. Some of my athlete takes them 22 seconds. And now what happens though, is the magic behind it is there's 3 neurotransmitters that are released: acetylcholine, dopamine, and epinephrine. And when that's released, now you're set up to learn skill or be better at your skill. And that's why we do it. Because Anthony, when I started doing this drill, I had a kid that transferred in. He's 4 months from being cleared by his team. And we would have cleared him too. He passed the test. He does the goat drill the first day in the off season because he transferred in. He gets sick to his stomach. So we knew something wasn't right. So instead of running with the goat drill, we just backed him down, and like a week later, he could do it running. So the point is, Anthony, and I have friends that actually put the EEGs on the brain, caps. A friend of mine, yeah, he's over in Europe. And he's like, Cal, this drill lights up the brain like it's on cocaine, but a healthy cocaine. Sure. Now, here's the catch. It lights it up when you're doing it. But guess what happens? When it relaxes, you actually will relax more. And the reason that relaxation is important, Anthony, is because the brain has connected everything and it's able to go up to do stuff, like high speed stuff, and then it's able to calm down more. And that's what you want. You want that brain to control its parasympathetic system. So you're actually putting them in more control of their parasympathetic system. So then when they go to do workouts, what I found is some kids that have in deficits and balances, it was the goat drill. Because there's times where I pulled our PR, I pulled everything, and we're doing the goat drill to see if this makes it better. And it makes people better. I get emails all the time from like high school coaches saying, I had a receiver that couldn't catch over his left shoulder. We started doing this, and now they can catch over their left shoulder. I'm like, well, just because something wasn't connected, right? So it's not an agility drill. It is a warm-up drill for the brain. And what separates the greatest athletes is they have control of their brain, brother.
We started doing it 2 weeks ago with our female AAA Blue Jackets, and we started counting down from 50 by 3s.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, that's challenging, man. I tried it myself. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's humbling.
Well, there's something going on, right? Yeah.
Something's going on.
People shouldn't don't think that you have to do it perfectly.
Yeah.
You don't. It's actually better not. You want to be a little bit frustrated while you're doing it and pushing yourself, because it's not about doing the goat drill perfectly. It's about the brain going, holy crap, I got to turn everything on. Oh, now I'm going to go hit a baseball, and I can track it better, and I can hit it harder because everything's dialed in, right? I would say it might help people get to that flow state a little bit better. You know what I mean? Because things are locked in. And it's just something that, and Anthony, like, honestly, there's imbalances in females, especially if that non-contact ACL, like there's something that has gone wrong, obviously. And I think the better spot their brain is, the less likely you're probably going to have an injury, right? And even they've shown for concussions, Anthony, if you can just see it coming and prepare for the impact, less likely that concussion is going to be as much as it was, like the impact of the injury, right? So I think that is a no-brainer. You can do it on the ice. Basketball people just dribble the basketball while they're doing it, right? They dribble basketball. It can be done with anything. Just do it one time, count from 100, count from 50, whatever it is. And then in the off season, I'll do a go drill. Then we do our first sprint. While we're resting from the sprint, we'll go do a go drill. I do about 4 to 5 reps, and then we go lift. Because I do 4 to 5 sprints. I do 4 to 5, and that's it. In season, for practice workout here, my kids come in, they do RPR, they do a go drill, and we're off and training. You know what I mean? And then on game day, we do 1 goat drill and RPR. And we'll do some warm up. Like they'll like to do a little bit of warm up. It's more mental. But yeah, that goat drill. And look, again, the foundation came from Dr. Sandek, right? But I just sped it up for athletes. And it's like the emails I get of people saying, hey, this kid, it changed this kid.
I will link that to show notes on your YouTube page. It's fantastic. Slight pivot, Cal. So we want to turn on to train. I'll be honest with you. I'll never forget. You said something about 11 years ago you started using this method. I believe I was one of the first ones to hear it. This was at the Elite FTS in Columbus. You had presented supramaximal method. Yeah. And I remember, I won't forget, I was sitting beside someone like, is Cal really off his rocker right now?
Yeah, I am.
20% 1RM on an eccentric. Is he off his, and I remember thinking, wow. And then I read again, and I read this, and you know what, the other thing I want you to go on this, because this was really interesting in the book. You talked about, number one, doing it. You talk about the surprise in strength with your athletes doing this. And perhaps the most, for me, biggest was like, wow, Cal, really? You talked about the central adaptations, the cardiopulmonary system adaptations. You also had mentioned one of the research articles, happened to be one of the research articles that I looked at my PhD as well, talking about blood pressure and lifting. So I don't want to go all over the place. Number one, What is the supramax method? When do you use it? And then what were the results that you saw with your players and athletes?
Yeah. So obviously supramaximal, I wanted to try it because I felt like I saw the results or saw some research. I think it came out of Germany, and I knew there was a potential. And I'm like, well, I could add this into Triphasic. Because I'm like, what the hell? You got to crack a few eggs and make an omelet sometimes, right? So, right. So really, but I'm going, okay. I actually was training my throwers back then, and I'm going, man, these kids squat 660 raw. You know what I mean? I'm going, I don't know if I want to go like 760. That just doesn't sound good on a back squat. And I'm going, okay. So then I was like, I just got to come up with a better method than 2 bars. So let's go with single leg. I could do leg press. I could do like 2 legs up, 1 leg down and do supramaximal, but I didn't have any leg press in my gym. So then I went to the safety bar squat, right? The single leg safety bar squat. And it ended up, Anthony, that what I start with for people, let's say you back squat 400. Well, what do you use for weight on the safety bar to get them used to it? I just used 80% of the back squat. And like, I was shocked, even untrained kids, whatever they go back squat or estimate, like I would use 0.8. And then, so now we're using 320 for their single leg squat, and they blew it out of the water once they become trained, right? So like I said in the beginning, I had a female use 600 this year. Safety bar is really nice, but that Mars bar that wraps around, if people want to check that out. And I've had throwers go up to 800 plus on a single leg squat, right? Doing supramaximal. So they need help getting it up when we do supramaximal loading. But and what happens is so Anthony, I had, like, if you look at my females that did that, the bone density.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Right. And that's not just the only reason, but everyone did plyometrics, but Anthony, like, the bone density was unbelievable. And we know that's just a general healthy thing to have, right? Sure. Bone density. Yeah. And then So you have to assume that the tendons are stronger now because the bones are stronger. And then, so theoretically they're more injury resistant. And, but I would also throw in like collagen into the supplements during that time frame, right? Collagen, vitamin C, glycine are things that you would want to throw in during that time just to help those tendons get stronger too. And then, so then what we saw in my males, and this was self-reported, which then I confirmed with only a few blood tests, was the huge hormone response. Now, I know there's a hormone response in women, but the males were like, Coach, what's going on? I'm using this heavy load. And and then we did some blood tests. Yeah, it shoots up the testosterone. Well, because you have to adapt, right? And really understand. So if I have a male hockey player who's doing 660 or 700 on one leg, like that's a lot of force on one leg, right? Oh, and they get really, really strong. So then, and Anthony, I don't like to spend all the time. I'd rather do my power and speed program in the book, because that's fun to watch. People are jumping. We're measuring. It's unbelievable. We're measuring bar speed. They're doing a bench throw. My guys this summer were getting 1.6 meters per second on a bench throw, right? Like that's fun shit. I don't want to see you grinding heavy weights. Like that's not as fun as seeing somebody throw you know what I mean? So with the supramaximal method, I could get somebody so strong so fast that I could spend more time training power and speed, which I really like training more. You know what I mean? So that's the magic. And then the adaptions that also took place that I was shocked with, that I wrote about in the book. After the eccentric, so what we had was the eccentric phase seemed to drop people's resting heart rates like 5 to 7 beats.
That's crazy.
Right? And we don't do any conditioning during the eccentric phase or the iso. But then the iso phase. And the research shows, how isometrics can help with blood pressure, right? Yep. Well, during the iso supramaximal loading, so they bring a weight they can't lift up, but they bring it down and hold it in that deep position for 5 or 10 seconds, whatever you want to do on one leg. I'm sure it causes a lot of the blood pressure to go up. Nothing they can handle.
Sure.
But Anthony, literally, I had people dropping between 8 and 12 beats after that 2 weeks. So I got people that went from like somewhere roughly around like 55 resting heart rate, 52. We're down to 32 and 36 resting heart rate with no conditioning, but the cardiopulmonary system. I call it like, and a lot of, even some doctors that I brought this to, like I have devices that measure pulse wave velocity. So like when the heart sends a load of blood through, it's how pliable the veins are, right? The arteries, and on the backside too. And I write about it in the book. But the point is like I could measure that. The changes I saw during those 4 weeks and the 5th week after of the ability of the vascular system to move blood. That's why their heart rate was so low, because we made the vascular system, the arteries, the capillaries, the veins, the venous return. Like a lot of times when somebody says, hey, my legs are heavy and I have Moxies, right, to measure things, I'll see that there's a vein. They have great arteries, they have great capillaries, but the venous return is a problem. Guess what fixes it? The eccentric isometric phase. So it actually got rid of that problem. The isometrics are the magic. So I'm going, wow, yeah, I got in better shape, but I'm not in better shape. But any weak links in the cardiopulmonary system were kind of, there was an adaptation in there that got rid of those weak links, which can be the veins. And the veins are one of the things, and the arteries and the capillaries. We have a long season of hockey, especially with your pros, Anthony. They probably come inflamed, right? Well, we know that those capillaries at the end are just so small. If they got inflammation in them, do you know how much reduction of efficiency they are? It's like 50% even, right? So then you're going, no wonder the muscles are more stiff and sore at the end of the year. They can't get that deep recovery into that tissue because the microcirculation is affected. So, I mean, what we saw, that was one of the things that shocked me about the supramaximal loading method. I was like, how is this possible? And I waited the next year. I told some people, I told Mike T. Nelson. Yep. And then the next year we saw the same results. And I'm just like, well, it makes sense once you dig into the dynamics of the cardiopulmonary and the vascular system. And when I was able to change the venous return problem in some athletes that did it, I was like, okay. And, one thing for your listeners, a little magic gold there, is that venous return. One of the things I found fix it, not, let's say you're in season, you can't do a heavy isometric. Is just a calf massage.
Yep.
Right? Because the calf is like I've heard people now say it's like the second heart.
Yep.
But anytime I had somebody in season, well, they can't do isometrics right now because I'm going to get a calf massage. Because when that thing's tight, it's like the hamstring gets tight because it just leaks up to the hamstring. And there's just more muscle tension a 10% muscle tension can reduce blood flow by 30% in these muscles. So when you got tension in your calf because they're in a skate or they're running the whole season, right? Well, the other reason people are always, their calves get tight is, the stimulants they use tied to the adrenals. Adrenals can, like, if the adrenals are shot, they're using a lot of stimulants. I find the calves are always tight. Yeah. So then a calf massage can help stimulate that venous return and a lot of other things, right? Just biomechanically in positions.
Cal, I want to make sure I understand the physiology. Correct me. So this is my understanding before I read this, right? Traditional weight training, it pools blood in the capillaries and affects venous return, creating a concentric cardiac hypertrophy in the heart, right? So here's where I'm going with this, okay? So I want to follow you here. If we're taking away that concentric and just using that eccentric, that big, heavy, supramaximal eccentric load, we're not getting that pooling effect. So we're just vasodilating. Is that the hypothesis that of how that's occurring? So we're getting more of a systemic circulation where essentially we're cardiac output is heart rate and stroke volume. We're getting a bigger gush, a more dilation.
Well, I think so. Once you hit the isometric phase, and when we put the moxie on it, right? So analyzing the oxygen just drops right away. Yeah. Yep. So there is a, with the oxygen dropping, the muscle can become acidic really fast. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And then I think what's happening is you're training the capillaries in that area. They're under a lot of pressure. I'm sure they expand and they're becoming more mobile, right? Sure. Well, then what happens is when you release that, there's a big gush of everything comes in and out at that point, right? Sure. So and then you do it again, right? And so then, Anthony, there's a switching mechanism on it in the cells to say, hey, I've reached that point when I'm under isometric load. And I read this in a hypoxia book. Yep. Where there's a mechanism in the cells that once you're under extreme hypoxia, like low oxygen, that the cells will switch and anything they can grab, they'll uptake more, which is a survival mechanism, which makes sense. I couldn't find an official term. They just called it, and it was an old book. It's like $800 right now. If you can find it, it's $800 to buy. It's awful to read, right? Because it's all just medical, right? But like, actually, I'll get you the name of that book. So if people ever want, But the point is like, you create such a hypoxia under extreme loads, the pressure in that muscle that's doing, I think you're causing huge adaptations, or at least large amounts of stress, which then cause pliability and mobility later. And then when you do the concentric stuff, like it has more potential to adapt and change even later. So like you do the isometric phase, you get some changes. I don't think they stop there. I think if you keep training hard, you're still going to get all those other effects that you can talk about. It's just in the next phase of training. You know what I mean? But Anthony, there's so much there because, well, and then Anthony, in that like the isometric. So I talk about in the book how the eccentric phase tears the tissue apart, right? And the supramaximal loading, like those, the actin and myosin head, like the farther apart they are, the more power the muscle can generate. So this supramaximal loading has been shown that it actually lengthens the muscle. And then when it contracts, it contracts more power later down the road. But be aware that you're going to be sore, you're going to be stiff, right? You're tearing the tissue apart. The body comes in and rebuilds it stronger through the eccentric and isometric phase. Yep. And it sets you up to have more potential to gain power and strength and speed later.
Upper body, would it be a traditional bench press?
Yeah, but honestly, I don't do much because supramaximal loading. I've found like if I get the legs, I don't do any supramaximal with my hockey guys especially, like because it's not that important. Honestly, it's not that important. But I still do triphasic then. So it's instead of doing 120%, it's more like the 80-85% load.
Got it. Talk to me about fast twitch, repeat sprintability sequencing. I love this. Talk about the methods that you use. Fast twitch capacity, i.e. the stair stepper. What's the physiology behind what you're going after? And I love this. I know you mentioned it in your first Triphasic and the world caught fire on it. This use of the French contrast. What is it to the casual listener? And then learn something new every day. I am going to try this with a couple of our professional athletes this year, and I know the day I want to try it on. High velocity potentiation cluster. Can you talk about the two those methods that are used for repeat sprint ability sequencing?
Yep. So the fast twitch fiber sequencing. So the goal was I was trying to figure out how to put more mitochondria into the fast twitch fiber so that I could then, because the research came out, as we all know, repeated sprint ability is a quality that if you have teams of similar like talent, the team that's running the fastest or skating the fastest at the end of the game is going to be the one that wins. Right. So then I'm going, okay, well, who's going faster? Well, the team that has the most endurance, but they need endurance in the fast twitch fibers. Well, there's not a lot of mitochondria in the fast twitch fibers compared to the slow. So the goal was, how can I increase that potential? So then, and you know what? It originally came from Warner, or was it Warner, or it was Warner Gunther. His coach, it wasn't Giles. Giles was the research committee or researcher that did the stuff on the French contrast and this fast twitch stuff. But it was his coach. I can't think of his name right now. That kind of started the French contrast. So the point is that the French contrast. So I think it was Warner that he had a twin. He actually had slow fast twitch fiber. Like he was like in the 40% fast twitch fiber, not 70 like most world class shot putters. So using this concept of French contrast and isolating the fast twitch fibers, he was able to get to 70% in volume. So he went from 40%, he was still 40% fast twitch instead of 70. But what happened was, it might have even been 30, but what happened was he got his fast twitch fibers, he isolated those so much that he got the volume of the fast twitch fibers so big that he was a world record in the shot put. Okay, so the point is for this is that I needed to put more work capacity in the fast twitch fibers. So how do you do it? Well, you could do a bunch of plyos, but eventually you get fatigued. So the way I like to do it is, there's the book from the Bulgarians that talked about the slow repetitive method, but like turning a bike way up, right? So turning a bike way up, and you're only doing a really slow, but it's hard bike, it's under load, and you're going slow, but you're recruiting fast twitch fibers. So then I got on the step. So I did it on the stepper. So basically I had my athletes on the stepper. We did 2 steps at a time, not very fast, probably 1 step a second or even less than that. And we hooked bands to their waist so that there's like 60, 80 pounds. So we do 2 weeks of just conditioning the fast twitch fibers. Now, Anthony, you could put cuff training on too at that.
Yep.
So if you shut off, right? So somebody could do stepper. If you just want to wear a weight vest, maybe put cuffs on their legs, because once the oxygen is reduced, the slow twitch fiber is not getting recruited, right? So the only one available is the fast twitch. So I want to build the capacity. And then what I do is I want to take, after I got some capacity, I want to do fast twitch fiber training. So that's where the French contrast concept came in, right? So the French contrast was basically a squat jump or a squat with some like hurdle hops, let's say a loaded squat jump, and maybe some more hurdle hops or box jumps. So it's 4 exercises. And what you're doing is you're just lining up fast twitch fiber recruitment after fast twitch fiber recruitment. So then what happens during that time is I found if you got better capacity from the stepper for 2 weeks, that when you did the fast twitch fiber, the fibers got bigger, faster. So the leg size seemed to get faster, bigger, faster. And then the next 2 weeks, I still need to address, because you're only doing sets of 3 or 4 in each of those exercises, right? And we're doing a lot of sets, but then I still haven't put the mitochondria back in the fast twitch fibers. I did some with the stepper. So that's when I went back and readdressed the stepper concept again, or sprinting more. And what happens is it will increase theoretically, but the results that we saw were that people could just do more sprints faster instead of like fatiguing at rep 6 or 7. After this cycle, they fatigued at rep 16 before they had to stop because they, you know what I mean? So we literally ran fast twice as long. Yep. So, and that's really what sports is. Now, am I always about hypertrophy? Not necessarily, because you and I both know there's athletes we got that we want to get them strong as fast as we can, but they don't need to put on any more weight. You know what I mean? So if we can reproduce that sprint, and that's what we saw, we literally had double the volume of doing it fast. They could do it, but they were able to do it fast, right? So that's a method, especially if you have certain people that need to address it. That's definitely a method. Does everybody have steppers for the whole team? Maybe not. Probably not. Nobody does. But if there's an athlete that needs it, let's say you have a running back or you got a forward that needs to get faster and be like, what you'll find is that method, somebody that's already fast, but they wear out, that's the person that needs that method. I mean, because sometimes if you think about it, Anthony, guys that are really wired, if they keep sprinting, they heat up really fast. So it really becomes a thermodynamic problem because the nerves and everything that's functioning becomes too hot because fast twitch fibers run hotter than the slow twitch.
Yeah, you know what? I think I first heard of that method, that spin method with the real hard flywheel from Val Nasedkin. And then,
Val.
Yeah, but I like that idea too, that now there's new technology. I'm sure you used it where it's BFR. You can put the shorts on and do that with BFR.
Sure.
You can rob the oxygen and hit those type 2 fibers as well. So that's great. It was, and I like, again, I like this high velocity potentiation cluster as well, which is in the book. Talk to me. I like this idea. I like your categories. Just for me, I think easier that way. You talk about flying 20s, right? Your agility, your acceleration, and your circle drills. This is where my brain goes to that. How can I complement those days? So for my flying 20 days, my speed days, I'm going to complement that with true plyos. This is just my programming. For my acceleration days, I'm gonna focus on larger contacts, more max strength. For my circle drills, those might be more repeat effort method where there's more foot contact.
Sure.
How do you program within that within your philosophy, whether it's triphasic or another model that you're on? I know obviously for flying 20s, that's obviously going to be before the lifting.
Yeah.
Do you have that within the microcycle, meaning you're doing flying 20s, agility, and circle drills within that week, or is it all more speed stuff and then more regimented towards a block approach? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So my high quality running is always done at the beginning of the weight workout, right? And we train 5 days a week. So let's say if I'm worried about speed, right? So the flying 20s, like that's max speed, right? So what I'll try to do is I'll do those on Monday usually. Okay. And let's say if you're in a speed program, so my athletes are either in a strength, power, or speed. It's all the same amount of work. It's just the speed people are doing squat jumps at 25% of their max. In strength, somebody's doing a single leg split squat at 120. So you see the difference. Like you're doing exercises roughly, do about the same amount of exercises in the program. It's just the exercises change because in the speed, I say speed, but it's in the weight room. You're doing lifting that's very fast, more plyo based, right? Yeah. So, and what I do is I match up that with my running. So if I'm doing a speed program that day, you're doing flying 20s, you're being pulled by the 1080. Okay. At supramax, a person that's in power is doing a flying 20 with resistance.
Got it.
The person doing the sled that day or doing isos or strength is pushing a heavy sled.
Got it. So then, very similar with the means, meaning the means are the same, or essentially they're sprinting. It's just how they're being done. The methods are different.
Yeah, I try to match it up with what's actually going on. So then let's say we do acceleration on Tuesday, right? Well, acceleration, that person, I still have the 1080, so I would tow them during acceleration, the speed person. Where, again, the power, they might pull chains for resistance. Okay? And then the strength people might run up a stadium step that's pretty steep. So I change up the running to do that. Now, yes, and I do sprints in my weight room too. So I'll do the same thing. I will, like if they're in an isometric phase and I'm doing a running in the weight room, they're doing heavy chain pulls with that, right? Like 160, 80, or I have the 1080, so I can just hit a button and it loads them up. It's really nice, you know what I mean? But not everybody has 4 1080s.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Not everybody.
No. And then, in the circles, right, I'll do those. So when I do all this running, like it's a go trail, I go do a flying 20, they rest. And I'm only going back to go drill. And like the other coaches like, Cal, I want to get some speed drills in. Yeah, run your flying 20 and then go back and do some speed drills, go do a go drill, and then come back, right? Like, so yeah, it's like I set it up. It's it's all like laid out, and the athletes know it. They'll run up there, and but the go drill at the beginning tied with this, because what I saw was that people were really good. Like they just got better doing the goat drill.
Yep.
With their running reps. It was crazy. And Anthony, we could actually see the difference in the speed just kept progressing, right? And then you pull the goat. So of course, then I had people not do the goat drill. And the margin from the first rep to the fifth, they wouldn't get as good or better at all. So then we knew the goat drill was just turning the brain on. It's pretty magic. Anthony, like I have people that do functional neurology stuff, right? They take courses and all kinds of, like, they were like, Cal, this goat drill actually fixes some eye dysfunction that they would do with drill. So, there's a lot of people doing all these. You actually, if you measure it, you might watch, like, it can act like, Anthony, the amount of things that goat drill. And then you throw overspeed training on top of the goat drill. Because I just did a podcast with Chris Corfus on 1080. And when people get pulled, so Anthony, so people understand how I figure some of this stuff out. I'll muscle test somebody. So I see a running flaw. Let's say I see a foot problem. I'll muscle test 27 lower body muscles to find out which 4 or 5 might be off in causing that flaw. And then I see if I can fix it really quick. So the point to you is, Anthony, I will I'll play with somebody. I see when they walk in, something's not right. I test them. Yep, you got a psoas off. You got this muscle off. Anthony, I tow them at 102%. And every muscle in their entire body that was off is turned on. I think it's a survival mechanism. The brain goes, hey,
probably
I'm getting pulled at 200 or 102%. I have to turn everything on to make it work. Take literally, Anthony, compensation patterns go away for a little bit. So then think about that. You stack the goat drill with a high speed, overspeed running, and then you muscle test somebody. It's profound how the muscles are turned on for at least the workout, Anthony. Even with no RPR.
That's great. That's crazy, huh?
Does that make sense? But I do RPR, I do the goat drill, and then I do that. And I was like, so Chris and I even saw some eye function that was drastically improved by overspeed training. But think about it. If the brain goes, oh my God, I'm getting pulled, I could die, right? That's what your brain thinks. Because like I could break a leg, right? Theoretically, like, you know what I mean? Your brain doesn't worry about performance, Anthony. It worries about survival. I could give you multiple instances where I've realized this, but the brain's going, I don't care. You want to score a goal? That's great. But I got to survive. I got to live. The brain's not wired to think that, hey, I'm wired to score a goal. No, you're not. You're wired to live. You got to make it. Hey, if you're running from something, you got to make it.
Yep.
Anthony, I've seen this. I've seen people on film. I've seen like animals hurt their foot, whatever. People, and on the next stride, they've changed their gait to adjust. Yep. How fast? Like think about that change of how fast the brain in one step was able to they sprain an ankle, animal steps on something, but it keeps running and it rewires its brain on the next step.
It is crazy.
That's a supercomputer doing that. Yep. That's like a 3-block supercomputer that takes a nuclear power plant to run to rewire shit that fast. Let's be honest with you.
Oh yeah.
That's the magic of what we're dealing with in the organism that we're training, the human, right? Think about that. That's crazy. And that's how fast the conversations can happen.
Talk to me, Cal, about this last portion of the book, transfer. And you had mentioned this. I like this shank and feet, the different placement of the foot and the adaptation that you're going after. Why is that important for transfer? Talk to the audience about that.
Well, what I realized, like the angular shank model I talk about in the book is that if you look at a kid, like if you and I, let's say our car stalled on the highway, yep, and we started pushing it, and we have Mike Potenza driving it because he couldn't push as hard as us, right? So anyway, and he's a strength coach that we know out of the he's at the San Jose Sharks, been there a while. But anyway, So if Potenza's driving, you and I, when we started pushing that, we have to have a wide stance because we're trying to generate force. Same thing with squat, right? So I'm like, well, if I'm in a heavy phase of lifting, I'm going to have a wider stance when I do this, any strength work, because that's what's going to happen. If you watch a kid push a sled, that's what they're going to do with no coaching at all. They're going to have a wider stance. And then what happens as they get it going? Well, they get out of the initial start of strength, and then they go into a narrower stance, which would be power. Right? So then I'm like, okay, I'll bring the feet in and power. And then for speed, I'm bringing even more narrow stance, because when we do speed, high velocity, our foot's right below us.
Well,
so like,
look at on the ice too, not to interrupt. Look on the ice. Look at your propulsive angles on the ice and how you open your edges up to hug and to create friction in a near frictionless environment. And then once you get glide, you want to take advantage of that near frictionless environment and you narrow your base, right?
Exactly. So that's one example. And then the other example is like the three-way foot is that I'll do so, you know, my glute ham, I'm fortunate, the glute ham exercise, if people look at that, like what happens is that I have a nice wide back on mine. So in a strength phase, when we're doing heavier work, we have a wide stance glute ham. In a power phase, it's a medium stance. In a strength phase, we have a narrow stance. And then if you change the foot angle, so I usually go about 10 to 15 degrees externally rotated, and then I'll go neutral, and then I'll go internally rotated, because I chose that because Chris Korfis educated me on the fact that, you know, when that foot strikes the ground, you're externally rotated about 10 to 15 degrees. Well, Anthony, if you actually look at what happens is, let's say you're doing a wide stance, heavy phase, you got resistance, band resistance on a glute ham hyper. Well, if you do all three foot positions, externally rotate a little bit, neutral, Anthony, it's a different hamstring grouping every time. So now I'm putting more emphasis. So then I'm going, okay, so there's slings that run through this body from the foot, because it's in a different position. It runs up through the hips. I'm changing and I'm training different things.
Different pool of motor units too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then you do it in all three of those phases with different foot positions. I basically tried to make that foot, the foot position helps with the hamstring proofing, right? Because I've hit all these variables. Yep. And that's the magic behind it, you know what I mean? And then we throw in the spring ankle exercise, right? Where, hey, if that foot is weak, the only thing touching the ground when we run or skate is your foot. If there's something wrong with it, or if there's weaknesses, and I'm shocked how many times this is a problem. And Anthony, I'll be honest with you, I don't know if the foot, look how strong we make our athletes nowadays. I'm not so sure humans were supposed to be this strong in the hip and knee, but the foot is it being able to handle that load. So it's very important to address the foot. And I'm not going to lie, I don't know if walking around barefoot, if I got a man, an athlete that's 180 pounds that can do 800 on the single leg safety bar split squat and can jump 40-inch on the vertical, he better have a strong foot to handle all the load. Anthony, because remember, if his hips and knee are so strong, but his feet can't handle it, the brain will downregulate the output of the hips and knee. So people say, Cal, I started these spring ankle exercises and my athletes put 6 inches on their vertical. And I'm like, they had all the potential there. You'd already done your job. They got a set of race tires that let all that energy transfer, basically, because the foot got strong. It's not hard. Right. And that's those spring ankle isometric positions. People definitely need to look at them, because it's often a weak link in a limiter, and it can cause hamstring problems. It can cause. So, you know, one of the things I don't do when I coach like that prime time is, you know, when we're doing the prime time is, you know, when they do that big scissor with a straight leg, pretty elite speed coach in here. And he saw one of my great athletes do it, and then saw another one that didn't have a good split. And, he's like, why don't you coach that kid didn't get the good split after the good one? I said, well, let's coach him in it. I said, okay, son, come here. I want you to get a bigger split. So we videoed this one. And when he did get a bigger split, but what we created was a heel strike. Okay. So then when the speed coach saw that, he's like, oh, okay. But like, look, the reason the kid wasn't getting a big split was because he just new into the program, didn't have strong enough feet, Okay, so the brain down-regulated the amount of distance that he split himself. So the brain self-regulated that so that you didn't hurt yourself when you hit the ground. Now, once we got his feet strong, guess what happened? Without coaching, the split became bigger. So you see, that's an example of that's an example of getting back to Mike's original box. You got to know the box, because I know that if I coach somebody to get a bigger split and they don't have strong feet, I can cause problems. And I'm putting them in a position like there's no more power they're going to come out, right? There's just no way. They got to get their feet strong before we can get them a bigger split. And I don't coach the splits. They just happen because we take the weak links out of the body so that the brain goes, oh yeah, I can get a bigger push. I'm stronger. My feet are strong. When my foot lands, I don't even think twice about it. And I'm moving down the track very fast, or the ice, right?
I love it. Want to respect your time. Two more questions.
Yeah.
I think you're the master of this. Dynamic correspondence. I look at some of your methods and certainly the explanations in the book. We talk about this idea: amplitude, region of accentuation, dynamics of effort, rate of time, regime of muscular work. Over the years, are there any that you gravitate more so than not? Do you all try to incorporate it when you're thinking of these methods with your athletes? I know probably what you're looking to get is something you're not seeing and how you can get it, but is there something that you come back to? Is it dynamics of effort? Is it rate of time? What do you look at when the hamster wheel's running in your brain?
Well, the magic of all those is they're all tied together, right?
Yep.
Those things are all tied. There's no getting around it.
Yep.
The magic. So Anthony, I think it was Medvedev that figured it out in the 60s. The biggest factor in the Olympic champ and the world record holder compared to somebody else that's on the Olympic team, it wasn't anything other than one quality. And it was the speed and rate at which your muscle relaxes. Does that make sense? So we know this, right? Yeah, we know this, right? And let me talk about like that prime time. When I said that Olympian of mine was it was a powerful dancer.
Yep.
What happens is when she produces force, the antagonistic muscles, all the other muscles in the body that might be stabilizing and not working at that moment in time, have been able to relax optimally. Because if they hold tension, Anthony, she's not going to produce the force. So then the question became years ago of how do I teach that? And I realized, and I confirmed it with a TMG. It's a tensiomyograph. It's a muscle device that can measure the relaxation speed of the muscle. And I'm not kidding you, Anthony. My best athletes, and they're not the best players always. I'm talking the best athletes. Like I got a kid that's unbelievable athletic, just doesn't have the hockey, wasn't exposed to hockey like the other ones, right? Like just, you've seen it before.
Yep.
And he's magic when he moves. His muscles relax so fast. You know what I mean? And so the point is that with all this stuff, it all gets back to the ability to relax the muscles. And the best athletes I've ever coached can do that. And I've confirmed it. Now, there's a local thing. So that's where I do all my oscillatories work, right? Yes. So when you do those banded oscillatories that I created an entire system behind, is that what we saw is when you do those that on and off, because you're just violently going, right? And you might do an overhead oscillatory with bands in a cross crawl position where you're getting 17 reps in 7 seconds. Some of my better athletes, right? My crappier athletes might get 12 reps. Yep. But the reason they can get 17 is not because the fast twitch fibers go faster. It's because they got more coordination because all the other things can instantly relax. And that's what we've seen. So when I have an athlete, let's say I have a hamstring that's not relaxing, if we do the banded kicks, that teaches the relaxation. So Anthony, the biggest thing coming out of rehab and return to play, when I see problems, is that they haven't got to that point where the brain, and it might be the injury, right? Saying, hey, we got hurt. The brain says, I'm not letting go of this muscle. I'm concerned that we're going to get hurt again, right? Well, when you can get the brain to let go, and then the muscle learns to relax, that's when everything's okay. And they can get back to optimal. Anthony, that's the local part, doing the muscle. The other part, Anthony, is that the brain, the best people in the world that I also caught, was that they can shift from a excited state to relaxed state. So, their heart rate is, I had a wrestler, Anthony, he was 185 beats a minute in doing the French contrast. 40 seconds later, he's like, look at me he looked at me, hey, when can I go again? I go, well, when your heart rate gets to 105 or something like that, 100, 110, whatever. He goes, I'm at 68. Can I go? I'm like, what? But he was a world-class wrestler.
Yeah.
He was Olympic caliber, right? Yeah. I'm going, oh, yeah, sure, get going. It's fine, right? But Anthony, what he had was he had control of his this is the global part. He could move the weights really well with the banded oscillatory, but his brain could control the parasympathetic. So he could go in the squat rack, get his heart rate up, do the exercise, but then shift back down. So control of that interaction between the sympathetic and parasympathetic system is vitally important. And you know what screws it up, Anthony? If you take your cell phone, it causes large amounts of dopamine. So before the game, I'm telling you, people's heart rate, the guys on the phone before the game, Anthony, there's so much dopamine getting dumped in there. I think they lose control of the parasympathetic, sympathetic. Because, hockey guys go out for 40 seconds, a minute, and when they come back, the more they can relax systemically, they can go out and do another shift harder, right? So I think we screw a lot of things up. Our environment's screwing a lot of things up.
I don't disagree. All right, last one. This one might be the toughest one.
Yeah, buddy.
Legacy. I asked this for some of our guests that have been involved in the game for a long time, and I don't mean just the strength and conditioning game. I'm talking professional coaches. You've done a lot in strength and conditioning. You've written several books. You're highly regarded in this field. How do you want to be remembered long after you're done coaching?
Honestly, I as a strength coach, I hope I'm just somebody that taught people to think outside the box differently so that the field can evolve. I mean, in 100 years, are there going to be better methods? Probably. Is there going to be technology that integrates with it that's going to make methods? Yes. I just hope that, a lot of people that come here that have left and went on that are doing amazing things in the strength and conditioning world, that when they say the two things that I helped, they realize when they left, they've never had more fun than anywhere else they've ever worked, right? So we have fun. We rip on each other, right? We rip on people. If my interns aren't ripping on me, it's not like we didn't have a good group. Yeah, you know what I mean? And then the other thing is that I changed the way they think, right? And I taught them to ask questions, right? That's my hopes. But the whole field is that we question everything. It's okay. It's okay if Cal Dietz is wrong. If I'm wrong tomorrow, if we find something better tomorrow, then okay, we found something better. But at least I took people through the process of that thinking, right? So that's the hopes. Legacy with my kids, I hope, obviously I think it's more important to be a great father and a great dad, you know what I mean, than anything else. So the kids that matter, does the strength and conditioning world matter? There's a lot of good people in it, but when it comes at the end, it's about, the people closest to me, making sure that we are, I was there, and I think I raised some pretty good kids. They're doing well in spite of their father, I tell them. So you know what I mean. So they're awesome. I'm very fortunate, very blessed. I mean, my daughter's amazing, right? I tell people since she's been 5, I've been there when she told me to dial 911, I dial 911. She was always in charge of it from the age of 5, right? I was like, Tatum, are we gonna be okay? She's like, I got it, Dad. You know what I mean? So, anyway. But but my legacy, it's about hopefully I help people change the field with their thinking, and just the reasoning behind it. So that's it. Thanks for asking that.
What a great answer, and I'm proud to call you colleague and friend. And I know you've changed the way I think, and which is awesome, because I want to be pushed that way. And the people that I come in contact with, I highly value that. Our guest today has been my friend and colleague, Cal Dietz. Cal, thanks so much for joining us, my friend.
Thanks again, my friend.